All right. So this evening we're going to be covering, let me see here, make sure we've got everything good. We're going to be covering the, perfect. All right. Okay, here we go. So y'all should be able to see. Garrett, can you see the slides? I just want to make certain that y'all can see it.
Yes, sir, I can see it.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
For some reason, I'm not getting, having a little technical issues. Give me just a minute here. For some reason, I'm having a little issue here tonight. I don't know why. Okay, well, we're going to have a nice little lecture today since it's not letting my power or my it's not letting my remote control connect. So I'm going to basically have to do it without my pointer tonight. So what we'll end up doing is we're going to go ahead and start with Unit 4, Ownership Rights and Limitations. Our overall learning objectives for this evening is going to basically be to identify the limitations on ownership rights that are imposed by governmental powers. We also will be defining each of the types of freehold estates and the rights and limitations of each conveyance. And we will also, in the same situation, distinguish between an estate and an encumbrance. And further, we will describe the types of encumbrances that may impact a sales contract. We further will end up explaining how tax liens, mechanics liens, and mortgage liens are going to be applied. And we will give examples of each type of easement and how they are created and determined and terminated. We will also explain further how an easement, an encroachment, and a license will impact the use of real estate, and discuss the different types of water rights, which are called riparian, literal, and the doctrine of prior appropriation. Okay. Now, with that being said, the very first thing that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to start off with, is going to be the governmental powers. Okay. The governmental powers, of course, in this situation, we're going to end up having, and we're going to start off with police powers. Okay. And so what I would like you to do, if you've not already, if you've got your notes, definitely would recommend you take your notes out. But tonight we're going to be talking about a gentleman named Pete, and that's P-E-T-E. Go south, don't write it across. Go P-E-T-E, where it goes down. Okay, so we're going to talk about a guy named Pete tonight. Now, the P, the first P of Pete is going to be police power. Okay, so when we're talking about ownership interest and going into that nature, we're basically going to talk about these different elements. Okay, so what's going to happen is we're going to, and I'll go ahead and help y'all out on what Pete's rest of his name is. So it's police power. The other E is going to end up being eminent domain. Okay. And the next one that we're going to end up having, the T, is going to be taxes. And the final E is going to be what we call escheat. Okay. Escheat. E-S-C-H-E-A-T. Escheat. Okay. And so these are different things that affect the ownership interest in your property that you own. Okay, so like I said, you're going to get to know about a guy named Pete tonight. All right, and so like I said, the first one that we're talking about is governmental powers. So when you purchase your property, you do not get to do whatever you want on that property. Okay, it just doesn't work like that. So in that situation, there are certain requirements and certain rights that you have and certain rights that the government have and so forth and so on, and we'll talk about that. But the first one we're talking about is police powers, okay? And so these are going to be the powers by the state authority to enact what's called non-discriminatory legislation. And the whole purpose behind the police power is that we want to ensure that we're preserving order, okay? We want to make certain that Mr. Wyatt here can't go over, buy a piece of property, and he ends up, he's throwing parties every night, and he's smoking weed on the back of, on his back porch, and he lives right next door to Miss Linda, and he's throwing all these parties, and all these women are coming over and all. We don't want to end up, he can't do that, okay? The whole thing is we're trying to preserve order. Now, I use that example because that's what most college kids do, okay? They get away from mom and dad. They go and rent a property, and they end up throw parties and all of that stuff. That's common sense, okay? Now, in that situation, though, we are trying to preserve order. So Miss Linda has a right to call the cops and have the cops come over to Mr. Wyatt's property and knock on the door and say, Mr. Wyatt, you need to calm it down. Anything that you're doing needs to calm it down, because you are, remember, if you remember from the very first chapter, Miss Linda, just like you, have a right to enjoy your property, okay? So she has a right to enjoy her property through it being quiet. But you also have a right to have fun and throw parties, but where it is not encroaching on her rights. Do you see where I'm coming from with this? Okay? So Miss Linda says she wasn't invited. That's why she's upset at you, Mr. Wyatt. So you should have invited her. So what happens is we want to preserve order. Okay. Another example that's often utilized in the textbooks and also sometimes on the exam is they love to use two different ones. They like to use pig farms and they like to use skyscrapers. Okay. So unlike the party example, say for example now, Mr. Eugene, he purchases a property out in rural Bryan College Station area. And so he has this property that he's bought. He's got about 10 acres. And next thing you know, Mr. Grossman buys the land next to Mr. Eugene, and he opens up a pig farm. Okay? And he has over, say, 500 to 1,000 pigs that he raises and slaughters on his property. Okay? Now, Mr. Eugene, what will happen in that situation if Mr. Grossman goes over and has a pig farm? What's going to happen? That's right. The smell is going to come your way, and it's going to end up, it's going to become a nuisance to you. Okay? So unlike with yours, Wyatt, yours is sound nuisance to Miss Linda. Stefan's is actually going to end up being an odor nuisance. Okay? So in the same situation, we have to preserve order. Now, we're going to go over here, and I'm going to pick on Mr. Darren right quick. So Mr. Darren, he goes and he buys his wife a nice property in Montgomery, Texas. Really nice neighborhood, no houses. It's just he got a good lot of land, and he bought her this house. He built it. It looks wonderful, really nice. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Garrett goes over, and Mr. Garrett buys the lot right next door to his property and builds a 10-story skyscraper. Okay? Well, what's the problem with that? The problem is that Mr. Garrett has obstructed the view of Darren's property, okay? Because now, when it used to be nice and sunshiny and they could see and all, now they've got this huge building right next door that is just a huge skyscraper, okay? It blocks the view. It is a nuisance, okay? So in that situation, the whole point here and what we're talking about is that we're trying to preserve order. We want to keep order where everybody is happy in regards to what's going on. We don't want people ending up not being happy, okay? So again, we want to try to keep everything where everyone is happy. Now, of course, you're not going to make everybody happy, okay? You can be in a subdivision and you can live next door to somebody, and you live next door and you keep your yard immaculate, but your neighbor next door doesn't even mow their yard. Never mows it. It's got weeds. Their ants and all coming over into your yard because they don't take care of their yard. That's a nuisance. But is it a nuisance that is going to require governmental interference? No. No, it wouldn't. Because of the fact is, in this particular situation, what is occurring is that we are seeing that as we go through these different situations, we are going to end up, oh, I just saw it now, by the way, Garrett. By the way, Mr. Garrett, his overall thing here is, Mr. Garrett, he just told you, Darren just messaged on the chat that he was going to burn your building down. So just let you know there, Mr. Garrett. So you okay with that? Mr. Darren's going to burn your building down. You all right with that, Garrett?
Yeah, I got guns.
Oh, he's got guns. So it looks like, here we go. We're definitely not preserving order. He says get some good insurance here, Garrett. but no, so all in all in this situation is that, and see, I've already switched over. My remote's not working tonight. But so what I was coming back to in this situation is that we need to preserve order, and we also need to protect the public health and safety, okay? So in the same situation here is, like, I go back to that example as the pig farm. Well, with the pig farm, Miss Lindy, I know that you were basically raised out in a dairy farm and all. Are pig farms, are they really in this situation? Are they taken care of? I mean, are they the most cleanliest type of environment for a pig farm? Are they very clean in regards to the operation? It's like a hospital. No. What are they? They're the most dirtiest? Yeah. They're the most dirtiest, most nastiest things. And they actually, if they're not properly taken care of, you can cause people to get sick, okay? Because you have the public health, okay? So when we're talking about these things, you have to be very careful that we're also protecting the public's health and safety. And we also want to promote the general welfare of the citizens, okay? So in these situations, there are three main points that we're going to be making throughout this evening, but this is the first one. So when we talk about Pete, and the reason I keep issuing Pete is because Pete's duty is that these are the things that you don't have control over. Does that make sense? You don't have control over these things. You can't go tell the cops, like, Wyatt, you're throwing your party. You can't say, get out of here, I ain't got time for you. No, because the cop's job is to preserve the order for everyone in the environment. Everyone in that subdivision has a right to enjoy their property. If one person interrupts the class, just like in here, say that I'm having a class and one person is interrupting, should that interfere with everybody in the whole class? Should everybody be penalized because of one person? No, it shouldn't, okay? So the same concept is, there should not be, even if it's by noise, by smell, or it's by view, okay? Any of those things should not take away from your overall enjoyment of your property. Now, does that mean, now let me go back. Wyatt, I'm going to ask you a question. Does that mean that Miss Linda should get her way and y'all should never have parties ever again? Miss Linda, is that fair that you should be able to get your way and Wyatt shouldn't get his? No. Wyatt should be able to have some fun and you should be able to have some enjoyment. Okay. Same thing with Mr. Stephan. Should Mr. Stephan not be able to have his pig farm just because Mr. Eugene doesn't like the smell? No. Mr. Eugene has to be able to work. Now, Stephan, of course, needs to find some way to keep the smell inside, but he should not be able to be said, well, we got to make Mr. Eugene happy. No, it's everybody has to work out. That's why you come into the preservance of order, okay? Same thing with the skyscraper. Mr. Garrett should be able to build a skyscraper, but he also should not be able to build it in a way that's going to obstruct the view of the other houses, okay? So this makes sense, all right? So this is one method here. Now, the next one, going to the next, so we went from P for impeach to now the next one, eminent domain. Now this one, y'all are going to love, okay? This one you're going to love a lot. Eminent domain is basically where the government has the right to acquire privately owned real estate for a public or economically beneficial use through one of these two methods. Condemnation, a process that begins with a judicial or administrative proceeding, or just compensation, which must be paid to the property owner. So, give you a couple of real life examples here. So when Walmart first started, Walmart ended up, how they grew so quickly and how they got some great locations was they actually utilized this doctrine of infinite domain, okay? Those of you that are a little older in here, you probably remembered back in the day, mom and dad or your grandma and grandpa would used to take you to the local pharmacist, and sometimes the pharmacist would have an ice cream shop attached to it. And you'd sit there and the pharmacist would get the pharmacy, the medication, and you'd get your ice cream and you kind of do your own little thing, okay? But the problem is that the local pharmacist oftentimes was not opened, but on an as-needed basis, okay? They would probably open up sometimes and shut the door when they want it and come and go and things like that. Well, the problem is that a lot of people did not have equal access to pharmacy. They did not have equal access to food. They did not have equal access to these items. And so what has occurred is Walmart came in and Walmart said this, would come into the cities and they would tell you, all right, Mr. Grossman, Mr. Mayor, sir, we see that Mr. Eugene, Miss Linda, and Mr. Wyatt, they have prime land that is within the center of your town. We would like to come in and take all of their land, build a Walmart, but we're doing it because of the benefit of your constituents, okay? Because we're going to take it from 3, but we're benefiting the whole, okay? We're benefiting, you have 15,000 people in your population, 3 of them are going to be upset, but 15,000 of them are going to be happy. We want to be able to go over and take their property. Now, Mr. Grossman is going to say, well, Mr. Nobles, what you need to end up doing is you need to go talk to those 3 individuals and ask them if they would be able to take just compensation for the sale of their land. So I come into Mr. Wyatt and I say, Mr. Wyatt, I know that you're wanting $1 million for your property. I'll give you $750,000 because this is helping the community. Mr. Wyatt's going to say, get out of here. I ain't got time for you. I'm going to go to Miss Linda. Same thing. She's going to say the same thing. Get out of here. I ain't got time for you. I'm going to go to Mr. Eugene. Same thing. I ain't paying for it. Get out of here. Okay. So now I go back to Mr. Mayor, Mr. Grossman, and I say, Mr. Grossman, I tried to purchase their properties at just compensation, and they refused. So I would like for you to allow me to file a condemnation suit against all 3, and I want to end up taking their property for the benefit of the whole community. Mr. Grossman then says, well, Mr. Nobles has done his part, so we're going to condemn, we're going to go into a suit together, and we are going to try to take all of their property without their agreement. Okay? So Mr. Grossman and I go in, I'm Walmart, he is the city, we file a suit, and all we have to show is what? That it is for a public or economically beneficial use. That's all we got to show. Well, is a Walmart a publicly beneficial usage? Yes, it is. And we're open 24/7. So you can get your pharmacy 24/7. Guess what? What did the courts do? All right, take them. Now, it didn't mean I get to take your land and you don't get nothing, but guess what they did? I came in and I offered y'all $750, okay? But y'all turned it down. When they do their payment in a condemnation suit, they give you your assessed value on the tax records. Is that high or low? Extremely low. So now I offered you $750 each. Y'all turned it down. It may only been $500,000 or $600,000 that you got. So what happens is in the infinite domain, they come in. If you don't agree to the payment, they'll just go in, they'll file it. All they got to prove is that it's either for public use or it's economically beneficial to the overall system, to everybody. And if they can prove one or the other, guess what? Approved. So in that situation, you also have to remember, Walmart has tons of lawyers, millions of them probably. And how many lawyers, Mr. Wyatt, do you have on retainer?
None.
Miss Linda, how many you got on retainer? Mr. Eugene, how many you got on retainer? So who's going to most likely win no matter what? Walmart. Okay. So in that situation, if you don't have any on retainer, you're going to end up being SOL. Okay. So again, in this situation, this is what actually give you a real life example. Okay. If you're familiar with 249, where's Highway 249? You should know. It's over in your area. It's in the Houston area. 249 goes through Tomball. It's fixing to be the new Aggieland Expressway. You'll be able to get to College Station to Houston within 15 to 20 minutes less than what you normally spend. So you'll literally be able to get in, I think instead of 1 hour and 30 to be into downtown Houston, you'll be there in about 45 minutes to an hour. So you can be from here to there that quick, okay? But for them to do that, guess what? You have to end up, we got to take people's land. So currently, there's a lot of cases, condemnation cases that are out there because people refuse to take the just compensation. So they ended up, they're filing cases and they're taking people's property. Yes, Miss Linda. Uh-huh.
About what you were referring to, what if there's churches and all that's in the way, and that's, isn't that protected?
Nope.
though?
Nope. Unless it's a historical marker.
If it is a historical marker, then it's.
If it's a historical marker, they have to go around it. But here's the best part. If it's a historical, so let's play that out. Miss Linda said, well, what if there's a church? Well, it doesn't matter if there's a church. It matters if it's a historical marker. So if it's a historical marketed church, then let's say that Miss Linda, that Wyatt is a historical market church, okay? And I need to go from here to you, okay? Well, if I was to do this straight path, guess what? I take very little land. But because he's a historical marker church, I have to now go over here and take out 2 people to get back around to you. So I take up more land to protect that one asset.
Is there no limitation to that? Because in a way, can they just keep doing that?
They can keep doing it as much as they want, yes.
So is that just...
But it has to come back. The key word, it has to be either public use or economically beneficial. How are they arguing the land for the road? What do you think, Wyatt? It's public use. And is it benefiting the public? Heck yeah. You get to cut down your time, which means we can be more efficient.
What if it's like wildlife.
That's another one. If it's an endangered species, it doesn't matter if it's just wildlife. It's okay. Give you a real life situation that happened by now when I first started teaching. It's been 2012. Back in 2012, 2013 was when this occurred. They were building a main road, that one that's in Austin that you can go 80 miles an hour on. They're building that tollway, and they were going through it, and they got to a point where they were building bridges to kind of do the crossover. And as they were building, they ended up, while they were digging, they found an area that had endangered spiders. There's not many of them in the world left. They had to tear everything down, put it back to the way it was, go out so many miles back around, and then build their highway structure. If it's an endangered species, you can go ahead and they're protected. But if it's just, there's some wild boars or whatever out there, you go straight on through it. Doesn't matter. Okay. So in that situation, it's only if it is a protected class, if you see what I'm saying. If it's not a protected class, it's not going to end up being basically covered. Okay. So again, this is another way. So this is the second part of P. You have P for police power, E for eminent domain, right? So when we talk about these things, 99.99999% of the time, this is where they're going to get you. What's that word right there, Mr. Grossman? Government's right. But you're going to say, wait, Mr. Nobles, wait a minute. You just said Walmart utilized eminent domain, but this says government, right? Is that what you're telling me? Right. That's why, what did we do when we filed our cases? What did I tell you who was involved in it? It wasn't just Walmart, it was who? It was him, Mr. Mayor. You were the mayor, I'm the deal. So in this situation, you filed it, but I was a friend of the case. That's right. And if I have a lot of money, I can influence or persuade things that I want to get done. Does that make sense? Okay. So even though, and here's the thing, the right to acquire privately owned real estate for a public or economic beneficial use. However, this is how they get around it. Okay. Walmart, Target, and all these other stores, what they often do is they give the government a certain amount of their profits every year for so many years. And that's how they get around all of these requirements. So they will, like Target, when I used to live in Huntsville, and Darren, you probably will find this interesting, but when Target first came into Huntsville, Target told Huntsville that we will pay you 5 years, we will give you a very nice hefty tax bracket if you let us come in and build and you take the property. So they gave 5 years, a nice hefty tax payment to the city of Huntsville for them to end up allowing them to come in and build the site where they did. Okay, that's how they get around it, is they get tax dollars. Now, after they do their tax dollars, then they end up, guess what? They get a very nice paycheck or tax benefit after those 5 years. So they pay a lot in the beginning, but then the remainder of their term that they're operating, it's beneficial for them. They pay a lower rate, okay? So again, this gives you a breakdown in regards to that situation. Now, the next thing is taxes. This is the next part to P. So this is that T part, taxes. It's where taxation, of course, is going to be a charge on real estate to raise the funds to meet public needs, all right? And then you have escheat, which is the last E in P, and that is where it's going to occur when the deceased has no will or lawful heirs. Now, what we're going to start with is I want to go in and start first with taxation, okay? Taxation, of course, we all understand is property taxes. So a lot of people say, well, let's just lower the property taxes. Let's lower taxes on the property. That's a lot. Let's lower. Well, the problem is here's the thing. Okay, if we were, and I could spend an entire course talking about taxes and tax law and all of that, and I'm not going to bore you with that. But what I'm going to say is, when a new school needs to be built, where does the money come from to build that new school, Miss Linda? From the property taxes. When there's a new hospital that needs to be built, how does that money come? From the property taxes. What if that old road down the street from you that has a bunch of holes in it needs to be fixed? How does that get fixed? Property taxes. All of these things that you have, your infrastructure, your schools, your hospitals, your police department, your teachers, any of these people end up, they rely on property taxes. If you end up, you cut property taxes, you cut funding to your city, which then ultimately does what? Your city goes downhill quickly. All right? You look at Houston, Texas. Now, Houston, everybody just assumes everything is Houston, Texas, right? All the way from Cypress all the way into downtown. But is it really that? No. Okay? What happens is that you go over here and each one of those cities are individually owned. But you can tell, I guarantee you, Mr. Wyatt, you're from Houston. You probably, if I said, name me 2 or 3 cities that are basically ghetto, as they say, you probably could name them off real quick, couldn't you? And it's because of the fact is that they probably have low property taxes, okay? When you have low property taxes, you get low quality streets, low quality schools, and low quality hospitals, okay? You want that high end stuff, that Woodlands level stuff, you gotta pay to play. Does that make sense? Now, a lot of people will say, okay, well, wait a minute, Mr. Nobles. How about we just do this? I got it solved, I know it. We get rid of property taxes and we charge them on income taxes. Okay, well, here's the thing about income taxes. Wyatt, if you don't want to pay income taxes, what do? Yeah, say you end up, you own your own business. You don't want to pay income taxes. What can you do? You're going to find a lot of deductions and loopholes and all that to show your income is what? As close to zero as possible. So you can hide money, right? Because you could be a business where, say you are a restaurant business, and you see that, oh crap, they're going to increase my income taxes. Well, I'm going to encourage my clients to pay cash, because if they pay cash, there's no record of it, so I'm going to go hide my money. What's the problem here? You're hiding the money, and so when we come to assess taxes on you, and you show me only $5,000 you made for the year, you're going to pay a lower rate in taxes while you actually made a lot more money. Do you see what I'm saying? Basically, yes. But if you go over here in this situation and you own a house, can you hide a house? And you go put it in Miss Linda's purse and say, okay, Miss Linda, keep my house in your purse. No, you can't. So in that situation, when we're talking about taxes, we're talking about they want to be able to tax an item that is not easily hidden, okay? So when we do these things, the most items that they go after is, number one, your home, that's property taxes, and number two, vehicles, okay? They get you on vehicles because that's a hard asset to hide too, especially if there's financing on it, okay? But when it comes down to, if you have say Miss Linda here, she wants to start a craft business, and she makes things, and she brings in $100,000 a year, but she only accepts cash. Well, how much, if she was a crooked person, what would she show on her tax records, Mr. Grossman? It's only cash, $0. So you can't end up taking away property from being taxed, because of the fact is people will try to find ways to pay the least amount of taxes, and they will, okay? Another thing is if Miss Linda, let me say this, let's flip the script here. Mr. Garrett, so you're an honest, truthful businessman, and you end up, sir, you pay your taxes, you do everything you're supposed to, and we got Miss Linda over here who is doing these crafts, pocketing $100,000 a year in her pocket and putting $0, but she's benefiting from your payment in taxes on basically the roads, on the hospitals, and her kids are going to these very nice schools because of people like you paying taxes. Mr. Garrett, is that fair to you, sir, that she gets to take benefit of those things?
No, sir.
No. So in that situation that is another reason they do it, okay? They tax these items so that everybody ends up, they're on the same page, okay? There is no unfair situation here. Now, some people will say, well, then I just won't buy a house. I'll rent. That's my way around it. I'll rent. Well, let me tell you something. What's the landlord going to do? Mr. Jacob here, he's a landlord. Do you think Mr. Jacob in this situation, do you think Mr. Jacob's going to say, you know what, I'm just going to pay all the taxes and keep my rent very, very low, and I'm just going to pay all the taxes every year? Do you think he's going to do that, Mr. Keith?
No, sir, not at all.
No, he's going to pass that on to you, and probably a little bit more, okay? That's what you do. That's how business operates, okay? So in these situations we want to make certain that we are charging properly, okay? We're charging in a way that's actually going to be fair amongst everybody, and everybody is paying in to taxes, okay? Now, escheat, this is our last one for Pete. Escheat is going to end up occurring when the deceased has no will or no lawful heirs. So, example here, Miss Linda, she is a single mother. She has a child, one child, and she has no other family, none. She has no will, and she and her child are driving down the road one day, and wham, they both die. Well, Miss Linda, though, here's the problem. Miss Linda has a house that's paid off, 2 cars, and she has probably, let's say, $50,000 in the bank that she saved. Okay? Mr. Grossman, question for you, sir. What happens to all her assets? It goes to the state. Because Miss Linda has no will, no heirs, so they don't know where it needs to go. So all of the stuff she worked hard for goes to the state.
You said that she had a child.
I said both of them died.
Okay, but what if the father of
There's-
the child steps in?
It doesn't matter. You are a single mother. You divorced. Okay? Give me just a minute, please. My phone is ringing. Please bear with me. I'll pause for just a second here. Okay, so what ends up happening here is with escheat, Miss Linda ends up, like I said, she's gone over, she was a single mom, and she ended up, her and her child ends up, they die in a crash. She has a house, she has $50,000, and in the same situation she is now basically situated in a way that she is now going to be in an area that she cannot, okay? She cannot basically transfer her assets to anybody, because the fact is that Miss Linda doesn't have anyone. She has no will, okay? So because of this, all of her assets that she worked for is going to go to the state, and it is under the term of she basically died intestate. Okay, that is intestate. Okay, intestate. That's intestate. That means that Miss Linda has died without a will. Okay, had Miss Linda died and her child died, but she left a will, then her assets would have gone pursuant to the terms of her will. Okay, now I tell my students every semester, it is imperative that you have a will, no matter if you have nothing. Okay, let's play another hypothetical here. Mr. Wyatt, we're going to say Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda here are your parents. Okay, in this situation, you have nothing right now. You don't have any assets. You may have $300-400 in your account, we'll say. Okay, you end up, your professor tells you, Mr. Wyatt, do you have a will? And you say, No, I don't need a will. I ain't got nothing. I said, you need to get one. No, I don't need one. Well, your mom and dad end up, they're coming down from Houston to see you, and bam, they're dead. They die in an accident. Okay? Guess what happens here? All of their assets, if they don't have a will, goes to who? To you.
So now I have,
Now you have everything. But here's the thing, because I've actually seen this happen while I worked in a law firm. Miss Linda, Mr. Eugene end up, they passed away. Their assets go to you. But here's the worst part, okay? 4 days later, you're out hanging around with your friends. You're out on the lake on something, and you end up drowning and die. Well, guess what? Your parents left everything to you because the fact is you're their child. But you ended up dying without a will, so all of their assets now goes to the state. Okay? So in that situation, all that hard work that your mom and your dad did over the years has now just basically been given right back to the state. See a problem there? Okay. So it is imperative that even though you may not end up having, like the key word here is you may not end up, Wyatt, you may not have assets now. We've had people that have actually happened that when I worked in the law firm way back in the early 2000s. Mom and dad was coming down to see their child. Mom and dad was coming down. They ended up dying, got in an accident, car accident. The child was trying to go to see basically the body, was driving back up because they were kind of coming from up north, coming down, driving back up. That person got hit and killed. Ended up, the parents' stuff was all willed to their child. Their child was going up there, got hit and killed. Child had no will. Everything reverted to the state. Okay? So in that situation is you have to be very careful when dealing with these things. You have to make certain you have a will. Now, do you have to go have a fancy will or anything? No, you don't have to go hire an attorney and do that. There's plenty of things online. You can draft your own. Okay? You don't have to, in that situation, be in a situation where it ends up being negative. Okay? It can be something that can be very basic. You can also do what's called a holographic will. That's where you literally sit in front of a camera and you say, this is my last will and testament. I basically revoke any previous wills. This is my current will. And you talk, okay? But oftentimes there has to be two witnesses to say that that was you and that you were in common sense. You were able to make basically legal competent discussions, okay? So there's multiple ways. Another thing, however, that's not going to be upheld is if in this situation, Mr. Eugene goes around and he writes down on the bottom of all his stuff, this goes to my wife, this goes to my son, this goes here. If he writes the stuff on here, that's not a will, okay? That's not a will, all right? A will has to be a legally recognized document. Now, it can be just written out. Right? You can take a sheet of paper and say, this is my last will and testament. I revoke any previous wills, and I want all of my stuff to go to my brother. Okay? You can do that. And as long as you sign and two other people sign, they're going to have to prove it up in court, but it can't hold up. Does that make sense? Okay? So the key thing is that there is no reason that you don't have a will. Just writing stuff on stuff does not make it a will, okay? All right. Now, we're going to talk about, so Pete, basically, if you want to, you can write somewhere on there. These are the limitations, okay? These are the limitations on your ownership rights. While with freehold estates, these are going to be basically the difference. If you remember from last class, the one we just finished yesterday, we talked about leasehold estates. Okay, we talked about leasehold estates. Now, leasehold estates in this particular situation applies to who? Sellers and buyers or landlords and tenants? Mr. Keith, what do you think? A leasehold estate.
Could you repeat the answers one more time?
So a leasehold estate does that apply to sellers and buyers or landlords and tenants?
Landlords and tenants.
You're correct, sir, 100% there. Because of the fact is, like if you remember yesterday, if it has the term lease in it, it's applying to a rental property, okay? It's a leasehold estate. But if it ends up, if it is what we call a freehold estate, the key thing on this one is that term free, okay? What I mean by this, Mr. Eugene, you own a home. Even though it is mortgaged, does anybody else have interest in it other than you and the bank? Nobody else. So it is free, not clear, but it is free from any other people having interest in your property. Okay? So because of that, the word freehold, it applies to ownership of your own individual property. Of course, we can't say free and clear because the mortgage is on it, but we can say that you do own it free of anybody having interest. Wyatt has no interest in it. Stefan doesn't. I don't. Linda does as your wife, but nobody else other than you have ownership in it. Okay? So in that situation, when we're talking freehold estate, we're talking about basically an estate that is owned by a person or a company. When we talk about leasehold, we're talking about leasing the property. So Mr. Nobles can have a freehold estate with a leasehold interest, okay? So he can have a freehold estate, but there is going to be a leasehold on it interest. Now, we still use the word freehold, but it's actually not fully free because of the fact is one of those sticks, those bundle of rights, is currently being leased out, okay? So it's not fully free. But a freehold estate lasts for an indeterminable length of time, all right? And a fee simple estate, okay, so what we call the most strongest one is called a freehold fee simple estate. That means you have no mortgages, no liens, nobody's possessing it, nothing. If you pay off your house and you live in your house and nobody has interest in it and it's all paid, it's a freehold fee simple estate. That's the strongest power you can have, okay? Now, when we talk about these different fee simple estates, we do have what's called a fee simple absolute and a fee simple defeasible. A fee simple defeasible estate is going to have special limitations with the possibility of a reverter, and they also have the conditions subsequent with the right of reentry. All right. So in this situation, a special limitation with possibility of reverter. In this particular situation, this is a type of area that you'll see, and we'll also come over here on the next one. But this one being a possibility of reverter is this. Mr. Eugene tells you, Wyatt, okay, that Wyatt, I'm going to let you live in this property for 2 years, but after you end up finishing, okay, you complete the tasks of the term, then it's going to revert back to me. So Mr. Eugene lets you stay there. Say you're his son. He lets you stay there, okay? He says, because you're going to say A&M, you're going to become, go get your degree. So he says, you can live in the property 2 years, rent-free, but when you're done after 2 years, it's reverting back to me. So I'm giving you ownership temporarily, but when you're done, it's going back to Mr. Eugene, okay? But he can also put a condition subsequent, okay, with the right of reentry. Mr. Eugene can come in and say this. Say that he comes in and he sees that the first, say you're renting property, he sees that you're getting in a lot of trouble because you're hanging around the wrong crowd, you're drinking a lot, and he says, all right, I want to stop my son from drinking and hanging around the wrong people. So he comes down, he says, all right, I'm gonna put a condition on something. You know that house you've always wanted that I have that I'm renting out? Those clients or those people are moving out as of December. So January 2021, they'll be out of there. I'm gonna let you, wife, go move into that property rent-free. You go through and you make A's in all of your classes and you stop drinking. When you graduate in 4 years, I'll transfer ownership full to you as long as you meet that condition. Now, if you don't, everything's reverted and I get everything back and you lose everything. Now, Mr. White, you can get a $250,000 asset just by stop drinking, hanging around bad people, and doing good in school. Or you end up, you do bad, and you end up in the same situation. There are people, by the way, that I've actually dealt with in my time in real estate that they set these conditions. They'll tell their kids, they'll tell me, you know, I'm buying this property for my daughter or my son. I want them to stop doing X reasons. And what I'm doing is most of the time it's drinking or alcohol or drugs or stuff like that, but they put conditions on it. But in the contracts, when they're written up, what happens is if it doesn't happen, it reverts back to the mom and dad and they lose all interest in it. Okay. So again, you'll see a lot of students, they're focused, or they may, some of the people you might have went to school with, they may say, oh no, I can't throw parties at my house. I can't do that. Well, the reason why is because mom and daddy probably have cameras in the house watching. So they got to go other places so they don't get caught. Okay. So in that situation is, there are ways that people can set these up in order to have different estates. Okay. They can put conditions. And parents do that a lot, especially if they know that their child is acting up. Now, another one that we have, a freehold estate, of course, as you can see, the definition is it lasts for an indeterminable length of time. Okay, an indeterminable length of time. Now, the life estate in this situation was that when we were talking about this, you have different types. You have what's called a conventional life estate, and you have a legal life estate. Now, a conventional life estate is in this method, okay? Say, for example, I'll use a real life type, or not a real life, but a situation here. Say, for example, that my mother and father will say, let's say that they're getting older, okay? And when I'm talking older, I'm talking like my dad's in his 80s and my mom's in her 70s, okay? They're getting older. They can't take care of the property anymore. And we know that their life expectancy is pretty much maybe another 10, 15 years if we're lucky, okay? My mom and dad tell me, say, son, you know, we don't want you to have to go through probate. We don't want you having to go in and probate the will. And, you know, there's a possibility that we could end up losing the house in probate and all of this. We want you to get the house when we pass away. But, son, in the same situation, we want to make certain that you can't kick us out of our house, okay? So what my parents do, we would say, is they say, okay, we're going to create what's called a conventional life estate. And what's going to happen is that we're basically going to transfer ownership over to you, okay? You're going to own the property. But what's going to happen is we're going to live in the property for our life. So we're guaranteed that we're going to live in our property until we die. Does that make sense? So in that situation, in the conventional life estate, what happens is that we have this situation where my parents, they put my name on the deed. I'm now the owner of their property. But here's the thing. If I go over and my parents die, then what happens is that I can, as you see here, there's two different ones. There's ordinary with remainder or reversion, or per arte via, with, remainder, or reversion. Basically, what these all are coming to is this. My parents put the deed in my name with the life estate. My mom and dad passes away. When they pass away, it comes to me. I don't have to go to any courts. I don't have to do anything. It automatically comes straight to me. Okay? It is a way and a situation to set it up where you can bypass probate. Okay? Now, the thing is, though, is that this reversion, depending on how it's set up, there's a lot of ways to kind of set them up. This reversion is talking about it coming back to me because I'm the owner. Right now, they're leasing it. When they die, it reverts back to me. It's a reversion. But here's the thing. There can be what's called a remainder. There can be a situation that my parents say, we're going to go ahead and we're going to keep a remainder. And what that is in this situation, if my father dies first, my mother still has an interest in the property and can be a remainder. She could, if she wanted to, after my father passes, revert it back to her for full ownership, as long as it is a revocable living trust. Most of the time, however, they're not going to set it up like that. It's going to end up being a life estate in regards to the situation where when Miss Nobles ends up, if Mr. Eugene dies, Miss Nobles most of the time is not going to be able to take full interest back. They just don't normally put that. Reason being, Miss Nobles would not want to have to pay taxes. There's some tax code issues there. Normally, you just turn it to your child, you die, your child gets the interest through a reversionary system, and it's done. You wipe your hands, I'm finished. Okay? That's basically how we deal with in life estates. But it is a way for the parents to bypass probate so that they can go over and they can end up getting full ownership to their child without having to pay taxes or income tax or inheritance tax. The other one is called the legal life estate. And these are things that don't have to be done. You just being through the action of being married. So Wyatt, you go out and you get married. You and your spouse, your wife, y'all get married. When you get married, guess what? In Texas, you have community property. If she dies, you get her assets. If you die, she gets your assets. That is basically a life estate. Her assets normally would go to you and you go to her, okay? There's also your homestead. This is a legal life estate as well. Creditors cannot force the sale of your property because that's your homestead, that you have a right to live in it for your life. These are protections, okay? Nobody can force you out of your home in those particular situations, okay? Does that make sense so far to everybody? Good? Anybody online have any questions? All right, looks like everybody's good. Okay. Now, we're going to jump in talking about homestead, and we're focusing on Texas specific here. We're not talking about other states. So if you're taking the national exam, this applies to Texas only, not to the national portion, okay? So when we talk about homestead, homestead is basically, as it says, it is a family or single person cannot be forced out of their home as a result of a creditor's claim. So Mr. Wyatt ends up, he owes Mr. Grossman $5,000. Mr. Wyatt doesn't pay you, Mr. Grossman. You happy about that? Okay. He doesn't pay you. So you go to court, take him to court, and you end up in that situation. You get a lawsuit and you get a judgment against Wyatt for $5,000 plus interest. So most creditors want to go after your assets. Well, what's normally the easiest asset to find? We just talked about it. Your house. So he's going to go straight to Wyatt, and he's going to try to force the sale of his house. Now, Mr. Wyatt did not take Mr. Nobles' real estate courses. and ended up, didn't know nothing about homestead. So Mr. Wyatt goes over here, and next thing you know, he's coming home one day, and guess what? Your house is locked, and they got an eviction notice on it. It's going in for sale. He's like, what the heck? What's going on? They're like, well, Mr. White, you didn't end up paying your debt to Mr. Grossman. So because of that, and you didn't file homestead exemption, we're forcing the sale of your house so we can pay him his $5,000. But my house is worth $500,000. And you're going to sell my house for $500,000 over a $5,000 debt? You lost your mind. Well, sorry, you didn't claim homestead. Because you did not fulfill your duty, Mr. Wyatt, guess what? They can force the sale of your home, period. Now, is that fair? Well, yeah, because you should have known your stuff, okay? You should have known the materials, should have been aware of these things. So when we're talking about this stuff, understand that a homestead, if you take the exemption, a family or a single person cannot be forced out of their home as a result for the creditor's claim. You can't, okay? So had Mr. Wyatt had homestead exemption, Mr. Grossman would have went and filed it, and the court would have said, sorry, he's got a homestead exemption. And Mr. Steffen's going to say, but his house is $500,000. Give me my money. Sorry, Mr. Grossman, he has homestead exemption. It doesn't matter if it's $1 million or $0. It's still homestead exempt. You can't claim on it. Okay? That's why you see a lot of doctors and lawyers. They put they always get a huge house. Huge house. Because as long as it's homestead exemption, guess what? He's good. He's protected. They're not going to lose that house, even if they do go bankrupt. Most of the time, you can still, in bankruptcy, you can normally still keep your house, and you still have to pay it, but they basically restructure your loan. Yes, Ms. Linda?
How many homesteads can you claim if you have more than one home?
You can only have one homestead active at a time.
And what if you have, if you're like a veteran or whatever, can your home be considered a homestead if you fall under the veteran deal?
Well, veterans are different in regards to the loan, but it's still one homestead. Doesn't matter what your designation is, you're still only allowed one homestead. So if in this situation, Mr. Keith, he has, let's say, his main home, he has a home on Miami Beach, and he has a home in New York City, and he has a home in Los Angeles, but he spends most of his time in his home in College Station, Texas. He only has his main home, which is in College Station, Texas, and all the other homes are not going to be homestead exempted.
But would it be a good idea to claim homestead on the most expensive?
Exactly. You want to make certain you claim it on the most expensive home, even if you don't reside in that home full time. Make sure you cover yourself. Mr. Grossman.
I mean, I know it doesn't matter if it's just protected, so things are different in other states.
Every state's different. Some states don't have protection. Some states don't have any type of protection. Yes, sir.
Are you able to change your homestead? Like if you were to own multiple properties, you put it on one
You can only change your homestead exemption once a year. So once you claim it for the year, you have to wait that whole year out before you can claim it change it.
And that's only if you have like multiple properties now.
That's if you have multiple.
If you move houses one to another, and like you're only owning one.
Right. So if you end up, for example, you are living in your house, but you're selling it, and it doesn't sell till June, and that one's homesteaded, you will not be able to, the new one you just purchased, you won't be able to claim homestead until the next rolling year for taxes. So during that time, you don't want to get anything wrong because that can mess up some stuff. You see what I'm saying? Makes sense. Okay. All right. Now, again, establishing a Texas homestead does not require any formal filings unless your county requires it. Okay. So for the test purposes, it does not require any formal filings, but in real life, because remember, this stuff's about a utopia world. In reality, you actually do have to fill out a form to let them know. You gotta let the county know. because the county has to be aware of that homestead claiming. Because again, if you own multiple properties, you don't want the county willy-nilly picking the one they're gonna let you claim as your homestead. You need to let the county know, okay? Again, selling a homestead may be done without fear of judgment creditors being awarded the equity, because the law allows the family or person up to 6 months to replace your homestead. So Wyatt, going back to your situation, Wyatt goes over, and Wyatt ends up in this particular situation. You sell your house in June. But here's the thing. In June, you sell your house, Wyatt, and you end up, you say, you know what, I'm actually going to go out of the country for a trip, and I'm not really going to start looking for 2 or 3 months when I get back, okay? As long as you have purchased a home within 6 months, you're covered. You see what I'm saying? But say Mr. Grossman's still over here, you owe him $5,000, you got a homestead exemption, but say you go out of the country, you sell your home in June, and you don't find a house till February of the next year, now what happens to his proceeds?
Since you don't have the homestead anymore, like,
You don't. He's going to come after your stuff because you didn't do it within your 6-month time frame. Do you see what I'm saying? So when you sell, say you sold it to Mr. Eugene back there, June 1st, 2020, you have 6 months from that time to find your house. If you don't find a house and you don't find one until February of 2021, he can go after your assets to get that because it's no longer exempt. Do you see how this works?
Like that's when your year lease or.
That's right. That's right. And he can come after your assets. Now, I'm going to tell you something, okay? This is a sidebar. You won't be tested on this, but I'm going to tell you because I am a private investigator and I used to do process serving. There is a way for me to still get your assets without violating this rule. Yes, sir. So you end up, you go and you take your proceeds, you close the title, and they put the money in your checking account, okay? You end up, you go overseas. Mr. Grossman hired me to come get his money from you. I come to you, or I'm not going to come to you, I'm going to start doing what they call skip tracing. I'm going to find out where your bank account is. And I'll do some little shady things to get it. It's legal, but I'm going to do shady things to get your stuff. And I find your routing and your account number. What I do is I take a order from the court down to that bank, to Miss Linda, here's your bank. And I give Miss Linda a notice of withdrawal from the court. And she has to write a check to the court that Mr. Grossman filed in. So Miss Linda, the bank, has got to give me a check because she's under court order. She gives me your entire balance in your checking account. I take it, I go over to the court, to the judge, Mr. Jacob, Judge Jacob here, give him the money, or give his office the money. Then you and Mr. Grossman have to appear within normally 30 days, and you have to show an itemized list of what that money is and where it goes to and all. If you don't show that list, he gets his $5,000 with all the penalties and fees and my money, my charge, and whatever's left over, they'll give it back to you. And Stephen, just for those of you online, Stephen just said there's not going to be any money left over. He's going to tell him up front. So again, in this situation, understand that you have to be very careful in these situations, because the fact is that while the laws may say this, there still is ways to get around it to get the money. Just is. Okay? Now, when talking about encumbrances, okay? Now, encumbrances are a little bit different. An encumbrance is going to be what we call either a claim, a charge, or liability that attaches to real estate. And it also can be a monetary encumbrance, which is called a lien. Okay, so if you ever have a mortgage on a property, you have a lien. Now, I'm going to test some people here. All right. Mr. Garrett, can you turn on your mic for me for a second, sir, please?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Garrett, question for you. Did you ever in your life, have you ever heard your mom and dad say, I've got to pay my mortgage this month?
Yes, sir.
You've heard them say that before?
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Keith, turn on your mic for a second.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Keith, did your mom ever say to you, hey, Keith, remind me to pay my mortgage this month?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Uh-huh. Miss Linda here. Y'all stay on, by the way. Miss Linda here. Have you ever in your life ever told your husband or your son or your daughter, don't let me forget to pay my mortgage this month? Okay? Yeah. So by the way, y'all there listening, yes, she said that as well. Here's the thing for all of you, so you know. If you want to tell your parents this, here's your way. They're actually not paying their mortgage. When they say they're paying their mortgage, they're actually paying their lien. So when your mom and dad or anybody says that I've got to pay my mortgage this month, you need to tell them, what are you talking about, a mortgage? You mean you got to pay your lien this month on your house? Because I'm telling you this because it may sound silly, but here's the thing. A monetary encumbrance, as you see on the screen here, is a lien. The bank gives you money and encumbers your mortgage with a lien. But your mortgage is not actually your debt. The mortgage is the ownership document that says that, hey, we have some interest in the property, but the thing you're paying is your promissory note, which is your lien. Keith, did you know that, or Garrett?
No, sir.
No, sir. I didn't know that.
All right. Miss Linda, did you know that?
No, but I have a question for you.
Yes.
All these years, why didn't you tell us that we weren't paying the mortgage? We should have been paying our lien.
Because the fact is I didn't want to end up being rude, so I didn't say that.
Not good enough.
Uh-huh. So, but y'all gentlemen can turn off your mics now. It's just wanting to make certain there. But so now you know the next time that your mom or your dad says, I got to pay the mortgage, if you want to sound educated to them, you say, no, mom, no, dad, you're not paying your mortgage. You're paying your promissory note, and you're not ending up in this situation. You're not paying your mortgage because the mortgage is just a document that's filed down at the county. Okay, you're paying your promissory note. You're paying your lien. Okay, so, but an encumbrance is basically a claim or a charge or a liability that is actually attached to your ownership. So how it really actually, if I could, if there wasn't COVID going on, I would actually take all of you with me down to the county court down here, and we would go into the deed records room, and I would actually pull if Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda would let us, we'd actually went down and pulled Mr. Eugene and Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda's ownership documents, and the first thing we would have seen filed was their deed. Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda, because they purchased the property, there's a deed. So that's the first thing you see in the book. But right above it, okay, so you file your deed first, right above it, bam, it's the mortgage. So before you even see, if you really were to open the book, you're really going to see the mortgage and then their deed. Why did they do that? Why do you think, Wyatt, that they put the mortgage on top of the deed and not the deed on top of the mortgage? If you are a person that's trying to collect money for Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda, if you find the deed on top and you don't do any more research, what are you going to think? They own what? They own it out. They don't owe anybody, do they? That's why we put the attached lien on top of it, the mortgage. So when you first open the book, what do you see? They owe debt to Mr. Grossman, who's the lender. Then we flip the page. Now we see the deed. Now, here's the best part. You ready? Now, when Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda pay off Mr. Grossman the bank, Mr. Grossman is going to file on top of that mortgage form a release. So you're going to see a release of lien. Then you're going to flip it. You're going to see the mortgage that was just released, and then you'll find their deed. Do you see how this works? So that's why when they're doing this, you're doing that's called a title abstract. You're doing title search. They want to make certain that you can see these things so that there is nobody going in and just saying, okay, well, they own the property outright. We're not going to look anymore. But if you put those forms on top, it's going to tell you right away, they owe somebody, we can't attach to that. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
How long do they keep those records?
Forever. They never get rid of them. You can literally, if you really, really want it to, anybody listening here and all of you in the classroom, if you want it to in the deed records rooms, now, of course, they're only going to do, I think it's every century, they close out the centuries. So like the 1900s are probably closed out. The 2000s, whenever they end up going, I think it's every 100 years, when it goes 2100, they'll close out 2000. Okay, but what they do is they don't ever get rid of it. They microfinch it, or they'll put it on Adobe. Is what they'll do, and they'll save it all the way back from the first existence of the deal. So when I used to go in Huntsville, and Darren, you probably know what I'm talking about if you've been in the courthouse. When you go into the county clerk's office, when you walk into their county clerk's office, there's to the right in the county clerk's office, there's a bunch of forms and documents and all of that, but then there's a little stairwell that goes underneath. That's for all of the documents that are like 18, 17, 1600, well, 18, 1700s most of the time. They're underneath them in vaults. They have to protect them. They have to take care of them. So in that situation is, there are different ways in how it does. But as a title abstractor, if I wanted to, okay, I could go in if I wanted to, I could go over there and say, you know, if I was in Huntsville, or Darren, if you were doing work over there, you yourself could do it. You walk in and you just tell them, I'm a title search or a title abstractor. I want to go in and I want to search the title of my property. And you can go all the way back to when it was first created, when it's first sold off. Okay, and you go back and you go back, and I mean that's a whole entire course. I mean, I literally could teach you an entire course just on title abstracting, but you can go far back in that particular situation. You can go way, way back to when it was first created. Now, of course, when we talk about encumbrances, we have liens, and these liens, of course, are going to be charges against the property that provide security for a debt or obligation to the property owners. Now, there's different types of liens, okay? There, of course, are going to be different types of liens, and these different liens, of course, are going to end up in this particular situation. They're going to have different stances, okay? So in this particular situation, what we're going to end up doing, and that you need to be aware of, is we're going to have our first lien, which is going to end up being a tax lien, okay? A tax lien is going to be what we call an ad valorem tax, okay? An ad valorem tax in this particular situation is going to end up being a tax that's going to end up making certain, we want to ensure that when we're going through these situations that, hold on just a minute, don't respond at the moment, please. Don't say nothing. Sorry, I had a text I had to take there. When we're dealing with a tax lien is going to be basically an ad valorem. So when they talk to you on the test, they're not going to say ad valorem tax. They're just going to say ad valorem, okay? Or ad valorem assessment. What they're talking about is taxes, okay? A tax lien, of course, is going to be something that is going to be based upon the property taxes. Now, if you do not pay your taxes, they can sell the property right from underneath you. So, Mr. Keith, say that you pay your mortgage on time, but at the end of the year, Mr. Keith goes over and God forbid, gets into a situation where he can no longer pay his taxes, okay? Mr. Keith has went up into a situation where he is basically broke, all right? Now, Mr. Keith goes over, and Mr. Keith ends up in this particular situation. He is trying to figure out how to pay it, but because he's not paid it within 3 months, the state comes in this particular situation, and they now sell his house off at an auction at an ad valorem or a tax sale. Here's the thing that sucks, Mr. Keith, okay? So just be aware of this. This is what's horrible here. Mr. Keith, you bought your house for $350,000. You paid down to $150,000, okay? Mr. Keith has paid down to $150,000, a $350,000 house. He owes $3,000 in taxes. Mr. Keith couldn't pay it. They go and they end up, not foreclosing, but putting his property on the tax sale roster. Mr. Keith ends up, he cannot pay it. They auction it off at the tax sale. Mr. Keith loses his house over $3,000. Now, most of the time, of course, the bank's going to be there to bid. But back in the early 2008, actually, when the market was crazy and everybody was losing their houses, there wasn't enough representatives for the bank. So people were literally in Houston, no joke, this actually happened. In Houston, a guy was able to buy a house at a tax sale for $300. Yes. It was like $300,000 house for $300. So in that situation, understand that we got to go into these situations, and you have to be very careful because you can buy houses at tax sales for a steal. Now, of course, nowadays, the tax sales aren't that easy because there's not as many of them. There are some here and there, but now banks are better prepared. We'll put it that way. So normally, if Mr. Keith didn't pay his taxes, what would have ended up happening is the bank's going to have some representative there to go in and bid on that house. Okay. Now, the other one, of course, is a mortgage lien. So the difference here, if you want to put next to tax lien, you can put equals tax sale for non-payment. For the mortgage lien, if you don't pay your mortgage, then guess what? That's a foreclosure. That's your differences. Okay. Now, here's the difference here. In a tax sale, Mr. Keith, God forbid this ever happens to you, Mr. Keith, but Mr. Keith goes over and he ends up, his property is sold at a tax sale for $3,000. Any and all debts are removed, meaning that his $150,000 mortgage that's still owed, it's removed. He still owes it, but it's no longer now collateral to the property. It is now wiped off. Mr. Keith has to still pay it, but if you bought it, Mr. Eugene, at the sale, you don't have to. It still goes after Mr. Keith. That's why the bank wants to be present. Yes, sir. Now, in a mortgage, however, here's the difference. In a mortgage, you end up, Mr. Eugene, if you were to bought his property for non-payment of the mortgage, his debts, any debts attached to that property goes with the property in a foreclosure. But in a tax sale, they're wiped. Miss Linda.
So I just need to clarify it for myself.
Yes.
So for instance, my nephew died.
Uh-huh.
It was foreclosed.
Yes.
So they sold it.
Yes. At the tax or at the foreclosure sale.
At the foreclosure sale.
Yes.
So the house was paid off in full.
Yes. No, not paid off in full. If it's foreclosed on, what they're going to end up selling it at a lower price, unless it's the bank that is foreclosing on it. If the bank goes in, if your nephew, when he passed away and his house is foreclosed on because he's no longer alive, if the bank took possession back before the foreclosure sale, then the bank is just going to auction it off, starting the bid at the debt that's still owed. But if the bank is actually not done the full foreclosure process and it's sold before it at a sheriff's sale, whoever purchases it purchases at the value. So say it was bought at 100,000 and there's 150 still owed. The 150 plus the 100 is $250,000 to purchase that house. Now it gets even better. Say that, and she's talking about my cousin that actually passed away. Say that his name is Andrew. Say that before Andrew passed away, Andrew had Mr. Wyatt here come in and install a pool in his backyard. And Wyatt had done a $50,000 pool. Okay. And Andrew dies. Mr. Wyatt wants to get his money. So Mr. Wyatt's going to file a mechanics lien on that property for $50,000. Now here's the thing. Mr. Wyatt does not have to always file that with the county. So Mr. Wyatt can have a lien over here, and when it goes into foreclosure sale at the last moment, he can go attach that mechanics lien to the debt. So that $250,000 is now $300,000 to purchase that property because he's owed $50,000. That's correct. So if Mr. Eugene bought the house at the foreclosure for $100,000, he thinks, man, I got this house for $100,000. Well, after it's all said and done, he's going to start getting bills from everybody, and he's going to be like, I didn't expect this. And next thing you know, now it goes into either a foreclosure or it ends up going into something else.
And then none of that has to be stated beforehand?
Nope. That's where you have to do your due diligence.
And that means just.
You have to do all your searches and look and all of that. So if you go out to the property and here's the best part. Here's the best part that's hard. So in Andrew's property, when he passed away, say that in this situation that Mr. Eugene buys up foreclosures. Well, the thing is Mr. Eugene does not get to go in and look at the house if it's a foreclosure or a tax sale. Mr. Eugene does not get to look at any of this. He's just buying it as is. That's right. So Mr. Eugene drives by, he looks at it. He can't walk on the property because he has no interest. So he can't even go into the property. So he doesn't know that there's a pool in the backyard that just recently was built. His closest thing he can do is end up get on Google and look, but if you did it recently, it's not much on Google. So in that situation, he doesn't know any of this stuff until after he wins the bid. He walks in and then sees all of this stuff. Well, what you have to do is you have to go to the neighbors and see if they would be willing to share any information with you.
Well, what if his wife jacked up credit card bills and all that? So you're telling me?
Well, if it's homestead, you're covered, remember. Excluding, let me cover that here, excluding these three that are right here. So homestead protects you from creditors, but it does not protect you from a tax lien, mortgage lien, or a mechanics lien. So if Mr. Grossman, you ready, Mr. Wyatt? Let me go back through here. Mr. Grossman, remember, did that $5,000 job. Let's say he went out and cleaned your house and all and cleaned up the concrete. It's $5,000 worth of services. Well, previously he was just a creditor, just credit card. Now he actually went and did services for you. Now he is a mechanic, and he can put a mechanics lien and force the sale of your house.
You're talking about like the same situation?
Same situation, yes.
So he's got two ways to go about it.
Exactly. Do you see how this works? Okay.
And like provide. What if you're in contract with the lawn?
Same thing. They're providing a service. They're a mechanic.
Wow.
So along
Mr. McLean here, Mr. Darren, he does things, jobs, odd jobs for people on site. He provides services. He does a service and they don't pay, he can get a mechanics lien, catch on that sucker in a heartbeat. So again, that's something you have to look at. And remember, these four are not protected by homestead. Three. These three are not protected by homestead. You don't pay these, your home can be taken. That's right, you want to pay it. Now our next type of encumbrance is deed restrictions. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we're starting to run out of time. But the key thing on this is that deed restrictions is in this situation. So say Mr. Jacob decides that he wants to go out and he wants to buy 10 acres of land. Okay. Well, if he buys 10 acres of land, Mr. Jacob is the owner of that land. He gets to make the rules. Remember, he gets the right to that land. And he says, Mr. Garrett, I want to hire you to go over and I want you to help me develop this land into a subdivision. Mr. Garrett says, certainly, I'd love to do that, sir. So Mr. Jacob, Mr. Garrett talk, and Mr. Jacob says, now I only want to lease these properties out to families. I do not want to be making them rental properties. I want these to be owners only. So Mr. Jacob can put a restriction in his, or either a condition or a restriction within his deed restrictions that no investors can come in and purchase his properties for rental purposes. He can tell them, no, we're not ending up, we're not going to do or allow investors to come in, okay? There also can be conditions and covenants that can be made as well. But again, these are private agreements, not public. The government don't set these. These are private agreements that affect the use of the land. Mr. Jacob could come in and say, you know what? I'm a smart businessman. So I come in and this is what I'm going to do. I want to buy up that 10 acres. Mr. Garrett's going to help me go in and he's going to end up building and I'm going to get a cut of that. I'm also going to be required to list those properties. I'm going to list my own properties, but then I'm also going to create conditions for you to come into here to buy that you have to join the HOA. And guess who is going to be the HOA president and owner and all? Mr. Jacob. He's his own agent. So in that situation, it's money that's continually just coming in. Okay. So there are ways that deed restrictions can be used to create income that's passive income consistently. Okay. Again, there are also easements. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you, this is where people mess up a lot on the exam. They get encumbrances and easements screwed up on the exam. Okay. An encumbrance, remember, is something that is attaching to the property, like a lien or a restriction or things like that. An easement is a right-of-way. It's a right-of-way. It's like a road, yes. So an easement is the right to use the land of another. Now, there are different types. There is the easement of improvement, which is said to run with the land when title is actually going to transfer. So if there is already an easement on the land, say, for example, that Wyatt, you need to get to your property, which is where Mr. Eugene sits, okay? But the only road to get to Mr. Eugene's is through Mr. Grossman's land, okay? So because you need to get to his land, there needs to be a road. Well, in this situation, the courts, well, let's not even say the courts right now. Mr. Grossman and Mr. Eugene have agreed that people can drive onto his land, drive on his, get to him, okay? So in that situation, Mr. Stephan has agreed to that. And it's been going on for 15 years. Now, Miss Linda, she's a you-know-what. She's very mean, really, really mean, okay? And she comes in and she purchases Mr. Grossman's land. Now, under this term, if it already, this easement has been running through, it's going to continue to run with the land, all right? And Miss Linda would be aware of this, all right, of this easement here, okay? So she comes in. Now, she has to end up letting it keep run. She can't cut it off because the fact is, in that situation, it's already there. You see what I'm saying? But here's the thing. Miss Linda, because we've had this happen before, Miss Linda does not like the fact that you're driving on her land to get to Mr. Eugene. She don't like the fact that Mr. Eugene drives on her land to get to you. So Miss Linda goes out and she throws nails on that roadway. She starts popping tires and everything. She starts putting big old wood logs across the roadway. Okay, she's obstructing the access. Okay. Now, in that situation, because this was a verbal agreement, what happens is it's probably not actually going to be on a survey. She knows of it because it's been disclosed at the point of sale, but it's not on an actual survey. Okay? So because it's not on an actual survey, it really isn't an easement. Okay? So what now has to happen is you have to go to a court and get a court to grant you access through it. And now you got to fight Miss Linda to let you to drive through it. But here's the stickler. If you can get another way to Mr. Eugene without going through there, she will win the case. So even if, and this happened before, even if you have to drive 15 miles around to get to Mr. Eugene, if there is a route to get to Mr. Eugene other than just that one spot, the court is going to decline your deal and you have to start driving that.
I think it's my grandparents live on property in LaGrange,
Uh-huh.
and they live, it's like on a dirt road, but they live behind a cemetery that's owned by, I guess, like LaGrange or someone privately, and they were using the driveway of the cemetery, so if you kept going back, it would go to the front of the house.
Yeah.
Because they did have a driveway that was like, it would just be a longer driveway, so they were using that one, and it was fine, but I remember when I was like teenager, they had to finish the driveway that they were originally building, because they weren't allowed to use the cemetery thing anymore.
That's correct.
So I guess, like.
That's correct. That's an easement. Yes. So in that situation, these are different types. An easement in gross is going to be an individual or company interest in or right to use another land. This is if you actually have the right. This one is your necessity. An easement by necessity arises when a land has no access to any street or public way. So if the only way for you to get to Mr. Eugene and the only way for Mr. Eugene to get out and get to the main road is through this one here, through Miss Linda's property now, y'all will be given an easement by necessity because Mr. Eugene has a right to get out of his property and you have a right to get to speed. So Miss Linda cannot stop it. Now, do you think, even if you get a court order that says that you have to, Miss Linda has to go, if Miss Linda is a mean person, do you think that she's going to be nice about it? No, it's going to be even worse. Okay, but there are certain easements, and you will deal with this. I promise you. You will. I've had properties that I've listed before that they ended up, there's just 10 acres, but they don't want to have the back part of the back, 3 acres in the back, way in the back. They want to keep everything else, but they don't want this one little portion in the back. Well, here's the problem. They have to allow an easement to get to it. And guess what? Most of the time, the person that wants the easement wants it split down right down the middle of their land. They're not going to go for that. They want it to run up down here and around and over into it. Well, in that situation is you can give them an easement, but it can be very detrimental, if you see what I'm saying. So when you're buying property, the least thing you want is an easement. The worst thing you want.
And when you say like you'll lose the case, if there's like another way to get there, does that already have to be like made, or is that like, there's available?
If there is so I'll give you the real life situation that happened. There was an eminent domain case where they split a road down. So this man used to own 10 acres.
Okay.
They put a main drive, literally cut his land in half. Okay. But for him to get over to this side to his cattle, he had to get onto the road on this toll road, drive almost 15 miles down, exit off, go under, come back to get to his land. So in that situation is, he tried to get an easement where he could just go straight across and have the city build a road for him.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we're not going to do it for one person. You're going to have to go down and around and come back just like everybody else does. So because of that, there was not a necessity. He was wanting an easement in gross, But in that situation is he couldn't use it because the fact is it was only going to benefit one person, not multiple people. An easement by prescription is acquired when a claimant has used another's land for 10 to 21 years, and to use must be visible, open, and notorious. So this, I'll give you a hypothetical, or not hypothetical, a real life case. I remember, and my mom and dad are immediately going to know this one when we talk about this, but in this situation is, a while back when we lived in Navasota, and Keith, you know how Navasota is. Navasota is pretty much a laid-back city. Everybody just kind of takes care of everybody. That's just how it is. Well, when we were in, or I was actually starting to teach real estate when this all occurred, there used to be kids that would walk from the other street, come through the neighbor's yard, cut back around, go through my parents' yard, and walk over to their stepdad. And they walked back through. They were tracking through two people's property so they wouldn't have to walk around and go to their stepdad. They just would cut through the yards. Well, the problem with this is if people are walking through your land consistently, I'm not saying every day, but there's a visible and open, basically, if you go look and you see a trail, that's going to be visible and open. And if it's continually done, it's going to be an easement by prescription. So if nobody goes out there and stops it, the city could come in and say, okay, well, we're going to create a sidewalk straight through here in your yard. And we're going to let people just walk through your yard. So what happened was my dad had to go out and talk to the gentleman and tell him, you know, we understand for safety reasons, you want your child not to walk a lot, but I also don't want to lose about probably enough room for a sidewalk to go through my property. So in that situation is, if there is something that is utilized where you're walking back and forth into other people's properties and it's consistent and it's open, visible, and notorious, and it's at least 10 years, that person ends up, it's an easement and it will stay with the land. Kind of like squatting, and we'll talk about that later.
Like, so it doesn't have to be a suitable place for a sidewalk.
Yeah.
It's just basically.
I could come to your property, you have some property, and think about this, okay? Say that you have 10 acres, and I walk straight down the middle of your property, 4 times a week, back and forth, enough that I've created a trail. And I've done that since I was 5, and now I am 15. Well, my parents could go down the county and say, hey, we want a sidewalk put through here because we have an easement by prescription. So we want to go on and have a sidewalk, split down his property in half so that I can walk between the properties that I'm going to. So in that situation, you have to be careful. It's not being rude. It's the fact you just explained to people, would you want them to put a sidewalk through yours? So again, you have to be aware of those situations. Now, of course, with encumbrances, they oftentimes are going to be created, though, by agreement. Most of the time, guys, people are not mean. Majority of the time, people they're not mean. Most of the issues that occurs because people end up not calling them back, talking to them, and things like that, okay? Most encumbrances are going to be in agreements. Like me walking up to Stephen and saying, hey, man, do you mind if my kids go over, walk through your yard to end up seeing their mom? And, of course, if they do any damage or anything, I'll take care of it. We're not trying to get any encumbrance or easement or anything. I just want my kids to be safe. Do you mind? He's going to say, no worries. Thank you for telling me. And it's going to be done. He may want something in writing, but it's ultimately in that situation it's going to be something that's just between those two people. Where there's a problem is where you end up, you don't explain it. You don't come and talk. You don't ask. Another one is termination, okay? It's where it's no longer needed. There can be in some situations that there may not be the encumbrance needed. Maybe in this situation, Wyatt ends up, Miss Linda owns that spot, and Wyatt comes in and he purchases that spot now. Well, if he purchased it, there's no reason for that easement anymore. Therefore, it's terminated. There's no need of it. Another one is that the owner of either of the dominant or the servitude, basically estates, basically the dominant estate versus the servitude. The dominant in this situation, Mr. Eugene, would be you. It's the one that's landlocked. The servitude's the one that's serving to get to that particular land. If the owner of either of them owns all of it, there's no need of it again. It's where they buy them. If the owner of the servitude tenement releases the right of the easement, it's another option. If the easement is abandoned, say for example, the only reason that Wyatt was going through there to see you was because he was your son and he was coming to see you, but now he's 20 years of age and he can drive to come see you, okay? In that situation, if it's abandoned, it's no longer there. And also if there's a non-use of the prescriptive easement, if what happens is after I've walked 15 years through there and I stopped doing it and now I'm walking around or driving now, well, then it's no longer used. It can be destroyed again, okay? But again, these are different methods in how you can end up destroying or terminating an encumbrance. Another one is a license, okay? And this is personal privilege to enter the land of another for a specific use or purpose. So in this particular situation, you probably don't think of it this way, but in legal terms, if, for example, Garrett said, hey, you know, Mr. Nobles, I want you to come over to my house and we're going to play PlayStation 5. And it is PlayStation 5, right? Okay, the newest one. Just making certain. It is PlayStation 5. And so with PlayStation 5, he says, I want you to come over, Mr. Nobles, and play PlayStation 5 with me and bring over Stephen and Wyatt with you. All right, sounds good, Garrett. We're coming over, okay? What has happened is Garrett has just given me, Wyatt, and Stephen a license. He has invited us over. Therefore, we are not trespassers. We are actually a licensed invitee. And when you invite somebody over to enter your land, enter your property, you have duties to make certain that they don't get harmed. So if Garrett has a Rottweiler and a Pit Bull that are known to attack people, and he leaves them out when we come into the property and we get attacked, he has breached his license. Because the fact is, he did not make certain that the environment was safe for his invitee. Now, if Mr. Eugene, Garrett didn't say that you can come over, he just said us three, and you happen to get in the car with us, and you go over, and while we're getting out, you run up into Garrett's house, knock on the door, open the door, and the dogs bite you, you're a trespasser. Because the fact is, you were not invited. Okay? So in that situation, you've got to make certain when you're dealing with these things that you are protecting people. That's why when you invite people over, your licensee, you're inviting them to your house, you got to make certain that they are going to be taken care of. You owe them an extra duty, okay, is what it's called. Now, an encroachment occurs when all or part of a structure illegally intrudes on the land of another or beyond the legal building lines, okay? So in this situation, what occurs is that, say, for example, Wyatt, he likes to play basketball. And so he ends up, how his parking is done, he basically puts his hoop so that people can play over on my side of the parking lot. So he turns the entire thing, basically the entire parking lot from mine and his, into one space, and he's basically encroaching on my rights. Because the fact is he's put something that's there that shouldn't be there, okay? He can use his spot, but he's intruding on my rights. Just like here's something else, and this is kind of, it's funny to some people, but it's actually serious. So let's say, for example, that you're encroaching, you're technically encroaching by walking on my property, but on the same thing, you got your basketball go here. One of my trees extends over your basketball hoop. Now I'm encroaching on you. You're encroaching on me, I'm encroaching on you, okay? And a storm comes and knocks the tree limb down, knocks your pole down with your hoop. It's all down, okay? Well, what happens is my encroachment has caused your encroachment harm, so now I have to replace your encroachment, which is also encroaching on me. Okay? So again, you have to be very careful in these situations. A normal cause most of the time, and people don't think about this, especially when they share parking places, is this situation. When they share, like say, you see those parking spots where you kind of drive in and park like this, you park like this, you know what I'm saying? There's a T, and you kind of have your houses, two different houses here. Well, a lot of times they'll have trees right by the cars to kind of cover them. Well, what happens over time? Those trees do what? They go over across like this. Well, when they do this, they end up falling down. Well, guess what? The tree that ends up falling on this side, this person's insurance has to pay for that person, and that person's got to pay for this one. Do y'all see how this works? So encroachments are basically intruding on another person's land without their consent, okay? Water rights. Now, these are going to be pretty simple, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on these. These are pretty basic, and they don't go into a lot of detail. Mainly riparian. So here's what I want you to do real quick, okay? I want you to take a piece of paper. I want you to write this down. I want you to write down just the word riparian and literal. So riparian first, underneath riparian, put literal. After you have wrote both of those words, I want you to put equal signs after both words. And on next to riparian, I want you to put river. Next to literal, I want you to put lake. So when you see the word riparian, what does a river do? It flows, it moves. What does a lake do? Stay stagnant, okay? So when you see riparian, you need to know that it is a moving stream. It's a river, okay? While literal rights are going to be for a lake, okay? So these are going to be things that are going to be, yes, most lakes go into rivers, okay? But you're talking about the lake. So in this situation with riparian rights, there are common law rights that are granted to owners by lakes or by land along rivers, streams, or similar bodies of waters. Literal rights belong to owners of land that borders commercially navigable lakes, seas, and oceans. Okay? They don't really talk about oceans and seas. All right, y'all? They talk simply about lakes and rivers. That's what most of the questions are. That's why I want you to know that. That's why I'm putting that key there. Now, the reason we talk about this is because of these three words. Okay? You have accretion, erosion, avulsion. Okay, accretion is basically it increases the land resulting from the deposits of soil by the water's action. As water comes up, it brings soil sometimes. Okay, so it adds on to your property. So if there's a lot of water, you're getting a lot of soil coming your way. Okay, but if you end up in a situation where you have erosion, erosion oftentimes occurs in the situation from this matter. Erosion is the gradual, basically wearing away of the land, and this occurs when the water does what? When it ends up, it dries up, and the water's pulling that land back out, okay? Avulsion is going to be the sudden removal of soil by an act of nature, such as an earthquake or mudslide. If you live in an area that has mudslides, you may one morning get up and see half your land gone. It just, whoop, there it went. Okay, that's a mudslide. These are different ways. You need to be aware of them. They don't spend a ton of time testing on this. These are just some of the methods, okay, that you need to be aware of. Now, the doctrine of prior appropriation. The doctrine of prior appropriation is basically in some states, these provides that water use, aside from the limited domestic use, is going to be controlled by the state rather than the landowner adjacent to the water, okay? To use the water, the landowner must demonstrate that its beneficial use of of the water, such as irrigation of crops. So most of the time, what happens here is that if you own a property that's going to be next to a stream or be somehow close to water, most of the time you have limited use for it, but the state controls it unless the landowner can show the benefit of the property. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you are irrigating crops, the state's normally going to let you do that. But if Wyatt hates Stephen and is basically damming up the water so that he can build up enough and then flood Stephen's property, that's not going to be allowed. Okay, and my mother can tell you some stories about the Harrises and the Gerkes and how they used to do that kind of stuff. Okay, it does happen. In regards to mineral rights are going to be used in what we call the promulgated form addendum of reservation of oil and gas and other minerals. Not going to spend time on that. We're going to talk about that in the next section. Okay, environmental issues. These are oftentimes going to be federal and state law mandated requirements that require certain environmental disclosures, such as asbestos and lead-based paint. How many of you are familiar with that popcorn ceiling? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Did you ever, as a little kid, Wyatt, get up there and pop them? Okay, you know that's the most dangerous thing you could have done if it was asbestos? Yeah. If it had asbestos, not asbestos, lead-based, or no, yes, asbestos, I'm sorry. Get them mixed up. Asbestos, if you popped them, they're fine. They won't harm you in solid form. But if you get up there and pop them and the dust gets into your nostrils, it can kill you. Okay? So it has to be done properly. It has to be removed properly. Most of them, if it was built past the 1980s, didn't have a problem. If it was built before the 1980s, you could end up dying. Another one is lead-based paint. Okay? If a house is built before January 1st, 1978, you need to know that date. A house built before January 1st, 1978, it has to have a lead-based paint disclosure. There was actually a court case years ago. I actually was watching it on Forensic Files. A little boy got real sick in this apartment complex that he was living in New York. They could not figure out what it was. They thought mom and dad were trying to poison their child, and they were looking at the parents instead of watching the boy. So they would always come in and interrogate the parents, but send the little boy outside. So the little boy would go outside and play. Parents would end up, they were interrogating. What are y'all doing to your kid? You're poisoning your kid. What are you doing? What are you putting in there? Well, what they didn't know was the little boy was going outside, chipping off the paint and eating it, because lead has a sweet taste. So he'd go outside and peel off the paint, put it in his mouth. Peel off the paint, put it in his mouth. It's a sweet taste. What's a kid going to do? They're going to definitely do that. The kid ended up dying. When they tested him, he had tons of very high level of lead in him. What happened was the lead-based paint can be deadly. It can kill you. Now, it has to be ingested just like asbestos, but in these situations, there are certain environmental issues that have to be addressed. Okay? If you do not give a lead-based paint, and this is very key, this is why I talk about this in this class. If you do not give a lead-based paint, say, for example, Wyatt, that you sell a house to Mr. Keith, for example, but you don't tell Mr. Keith that there's lead in the home. And Mr. Keith moves in with his children, and his son dies because of the lead-based paint or lead. Did you know that you now can be liable for it and your broker? That is why it is imperative that you get that form. Because if you don't have that form, what ends up happening is this. You put your child at risk, you put the client at risk, and you put yourself and your brokerage at risk. That person that was the broker that leased that place out, so that example I gave you, the broker ended up serving 15 years in jail. because they failed to give the proper documentation to the tenants. And it is not just for selling of properties. If you're renting a property built before January 1st, 1978, you have to give that disclosure. So if you're just renting it for somebody, you have to provide that disclosure. There's also potential buyers may make contracts contingent on the inspections for various hazardous substances. I'm going to close out. Are we on our last one? Yes, perfect. So in this situation, I'm going to close out on one thing, just to kind of give y'all a little bit of a little story that I always like to tell people. I had a person, of course, when we think about inspections, and we'll discuss inspections as we get into it, but my best one was this. What ended up happening in this situation is my client ended up, they wanted to go look at a property that was here in town, and they wanted to get inspections. And I said, of course, let's go get inspections. You know, let me get my general home inspector. So they were like, okay, we want that. We also want to have a mode inspection because it was an older home. And I said, so, okay, so we get them all done. And she told me, she said, wait, by the way, can you get me a, basically, I don't know, I can't remember what it was called, but it basically was a ghost inspector. She wanted to make certain that there was no spirits in the house. And she told me the term, and I'd have to go back and look at it again. I can't remember what it was, but we had to try to find somebody that would go through the house to see if there was any spirits in the home. You will get people that will come in some of these situations, and they will ask you, we want inspections, but we also want to have different types of inspections. If they ask for an inspection that is like a ghost inspection, some of them want radon inspections, some of them want mode inspections. If they want those things, okay, you accommodate as much as you can, but you do not laugh at them or laugh it off. Their job, your job is to accommodate them. That's what your job is, no matter what. No matter how silly you may think it is, there are people that do believe in those things. I have had people that before they bought the house or put an offer in, they wanted their priest to come out to the house. I accommodate. That's my job. I accommodate whatever they ask. Your clients are going to ask you a lot of different things for these properties. You accommodate to your clients. You do not act as though it's silly. You do not treat it as silly. You go in because you will have people that will be serious about these things. There are people that have actually lost family members because of asbestos or because of lead, and they want a thorough check. It's not your job to judge that. It's your job to make certain that it gets done. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right. So before we call it a night, real quick, does anybody in here have questions for me over what we talked tonight? Anybody online have any questions for me before we call it a night? All right. So I'm going to assume everybody is good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call this a class. We will pick up tomorrow, 5:30 to 7:30. Again, after tomorrow, we're halfway done, guys and gals. We have completed one half of the course. So what would have normally taken 2 months, we've completed in 1 week. All right. So we have just knocked out 1 month worth of courses in 1 week. All right. Or 2 months. I'm sorry, 2 months, because it's normally 4 months in a semester. So we've knocked out 2 months in 1 week. So it is a lot, but y'all are doing great. Other than that, we're going to go ahead and call this a class, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good night.